Good afternoon. I'm Carol Van Hooser. I'm the Assistant Professor of Biology here at Rochester College, and the course that you have enrolled in is Biological Science 1. It's an introduction to cellular biology, and in this course we are going to be spending time looking at the nature of the cell structure, the activities of the cell. We'll spend a little time looking at what is science. Science is the way we've gained information. And then we're going to be looking at life. What is life? A cell is the basic unit of life. What does that mean? We say that a cell is a living thing. We can walk out on the sidewalk and we can see a pebble on the sidewalk and we can know that that is not a living thing. But if we were to see a worm on that same sidewalk, we would know and recognize that that was living. What's the difference? How are they different from one another? What does a cell do? What does a living thing do that a non-living thing doesn't do? How are they different? That's what we want to find out. And then we know that a cell is the basic unit of life, but they're certainly not all the same. There's a great deal of diversity in living cells and in living things. How does that happen? What are the characteristics that all living things have? And how are cells different? How are living things different from one another? It's fairly easy for us to understand that we are individual living organisms, but it's not necessarily as easy to understand that the body is made up of trillions of cells. Each of those cells is also an individual living organism. They have needs, and those needs have to be met. They have to have nutrients. They have to get rid of waste material. In your bodies, each one of those cells utilizes oxygen. How does that happen? We're going to look at those cells and see that they're working as a community, each individual doing its own particular job to meet the needs of the entire community. Whereas single-celled organisms, spending their whole life as a single cell, meet all of their needs on their own. And we also have looked at cells. We've either used a microscope or seen pictures that have been taken with a microscope so that we've seen images of individual cells, of tissues. We've looked at bone tissue or blood cells or nerve tissue at some point. At least many of us have. And those cells look different from one another, and yet they have similar kinds of functions. Each one is an individual, but each one working in community to provide for the needs of the other neighbors, if you will, in their community. We will be looking at some PowerPoints, and I'll have voiceover with those PowerPoints so that I'll be explaining those slides. There'll be some animations and some videos for you to see. There'll be a textbook that I will expect you to read, and so there'll be reading assignments from the textbook and questions that will go along with those that you'll be working on in groups. And in addition to that, I'll have some outside readings for you that you will be summarizing, writing abstracts about. And in those readings, part of what I'm going to want you to understand is that a textbook is one kind of scientific reading, if you will. But a scientist also writes articles on current research that they're doing, and they write in a way that their peers will understand. Other researchers in the same field will understand that. Well, perhaps you and I wouldn't understand the language that they use with each other, and so researchers also want to convey their information to lay people. And so we are going to see that they have different modes of writing and conveying that information to us. So if you read Discover magazine, that's not going to look the same as if you're reading a specific scientific journal that's written for researchers themselves. You'll be reading some of those various types of various genres of literature, if you will, and looking at how they're different and yet still conveying some of the same kinds of information. So through the course of our study, using the PowerPoints, using the videos, using the activities that you'll be doing in lab, what we're going to find through this process, hopefully, is that we come out with a better understanding of the individual cells And really you will see then that that helps us to understand how the whole body works. That the activities that occur in the body are actually occurring in the individual living cells. And so as we study cellular structure, cellular metabolism, the ideas of photosynthesis, the concepts of using energy, even things like the nutrients that we take into our body, what happens to those things. If we can understand what happens in the cell itself, that'll help us to understand what happens in the body as a whole. So I'm looking forward to working with you, to visiting with you, to learning from you, and I'm hoping that you will enjoy the opportunity to study the cellular structure, the nature of living things, and the amazing diversity of living organisms that we find on the earth.